Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spoken Greats podcast, where we take great ideas from great books. Today, we're going to be talking about second brains and my experience of using one. Today, I'm drinking an instant coffee. Please let me know in the comments what you're drinking. So, a year ago, I read a book called How to Build a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. If you're not familiar with a second brain, or sometimes known as a commonplace book, it's defined as an external centralized digital repository for the things you learn and the resources from which they come. I should add, it doesn't have to be digital. This could be as basic as a notebook with dividers and folders, etc., right through to some sort of productivity software. Quite popular ones are Evernote, Notion. The idea being that you can then refer back to this second brain to remind yourself of good ideas. So in effect, it's a tool for improving your memory and then subsequently your productivity, hopefully. So I trialed using Obsidian, which is a free open source second brain software. I chose this for a few reasons. First of all, it's free, and I didn't know what I was getting into with setting up one of these softwares, and I didn't want to get into some kind of expensive plan. Second of all, from a security perspective, it's completely offline, and if you do decide to sync across multiple devices, it's end-to-end encrypted, so only you can view this data, whereas with some other companies that could be more vulnerable, especially if it's a cloud-based system, and you have to have some considerations there as well. If, for example, you're putting your personal data on it, you're using it for work purposes, whether you can put your company data on this software, it's just something to consider. So using Obsidian, I cut all of that out to make it as simple, cheap thrills process as possible to get right down into it. So I tried this for a while, and I followed some of the principles in building a second brain. So the format Tiago Forte recommends is code, which is capture, organize, distill, express. So capture, you collect the information. Organize, you put it in appropriate space where it's easy to find and come back to. You distill, so you break things down into their essential components and simplify them so that they're easy to read. And then express, so maybe you'll share that knowledge with someone else, so you'll produce something as a result of the knowledge that you've gained. Now, what you decide to capture is entirely up to you. It could depend on your current goals or projects in life or different ideas. You may wish to set yourself reminders for tasks that you need to do at work, or admin tasks in the home, or ideas that you've taken from books to remind yourself. You could even use a second brain for revision, for learning a language or revising a skill. I mainly used it for capturing ideas from books. After I'd read something, I would put ideas that I found interesting into Obsidian. And you could create links like Wikipedia. You could create a chain linking one article to another. I'll get on to another positive that I took from building a second brain, which was in the organize section. It uses the PARA method, which is projects, areas, resources, archive. So projects, this can be anything that you're currently working on the sort of short to medium term basis. And then areas, this could be more broader categories which are more thematic and you're looking at on a longer term basis. In work, this could be admin, it could be personal development, it could be fitness, it could be finances, it could be skills that you want to learn in the long term. And then resources. So it could be templates for how to do something, guides, tutorials, it could be cheat sheets, all sorts of things that you can refer back to. And then finally, archive is for anything which you've finished using, but you might still want to refer back to at some point. I've actually found this system for organizing my work emails extremely effective. It's really helped me to keep a clear inbox so that I'm not bombarded by emails, trying to search through hundreds of emails in one folder. So I actually still use the power method for my emails. That's where it finished for me, because I have to say, I didn't really enjoy using a second brain. I think there's a few reasons for that. Number one, I started to become less intentional with the information that I was collecting. So I would start to add stuff into Obsidian that I felt like, oh yeah, that would be good to learn, or oh, I really feel like I should know it. And I became so obsessed with collection that I didn't really look at the utility of actually going back and using the stuff that I put in. And obviously any sort of second brain is only as good as the stuff that you put into it. The other thing is that I found that it didn't resonate with me in storing things in a digital format, because I felt like it was an excuse to use my devices a lot more often than I otherwise would. I came to the conclusion that you have to make peace with the fact that you can't learn everything or know everything. And I've always found the quote by Tim Ferriss, "The good shit sticks," to be really useful. For example, when I do these podcasts, I don't usually make many notes before I speak. I usually just speak about the books, and whatever the most pertinent things that I remember is what I convey to you. And of course I'm going to miss important things, but if it wasn't important to me, then arguably I shouldn't make an effort to remember it. Now, I'm not saying that these softwares are totally useless. I'm sure a lot of people find them useful, and there's a lot to be said for note-taking. As a lot of studies have been done on even just the act of capturing something. So people who write notes of something or take a photo of something, even if they never again look at the photo or look at their notes, they tended to remember something better than someone who didn't capture it at all. And that might be because you're making multiple links in your brain when you're performing another action alongside it. It might also be a subliminal signal that you're sending that this thing is important, so it needs remembering. So there is some evidence that capturing information is an effective way to improve your memory. My concern I had was that it was causing me to consume more information. And the trouble with that is that you're constantly on the horizon of the next shiny object. Oh, yes, I could learn how to do this thing, or I could learn how to do that. And then before you know it, you've got thousands of items on your wish list, to-do list, etc. And then suddenly you're not going to watch all of these YouTube tutorials, and you're not going to order all of these books on Amazon. So at some point, you have to make peace with enough is enough, really. Decide what it is that is truly important to you and focus on that. It's a very uncomfortable fact that we will all die with things left on our to-do list. you'll never get to that sense of completion. And there is sort of frantic activity in, I suppose it's a form of coping really, with productivity apps like these, where you're capturing everything as if you all have unlimited time to go through all of it. Most information we consume is perishable, so it's time sensitive. It loses its relevance on quite a short time frame. This is what Nassim Taleb describes in Fooled by Randomness as noise, information which has very little relevance. So he gives the example of news affecting the market, and the media will jump on any sort of price variation and they will look for the nearest plausible explanation for it. So they'll say that the pound soars by 0.01% on news that the Bank of England might not increase interest rates. And then in the very same day, you could find another news outlet who's decided to jump on the movement of the pound drops by 0.01% as Barclays records a fall in profit. The implication is that the two events are linked. X must have caused Y. The issue with this is that often these movements are so small, and if you look at the standard deviation in international markets, such small percentage points are highly likely to be noise rather than signal. And you can find these sorts of articles every single day in economic news. And it wouldn't really inform you any better on the state of the economy if you were looking at those day-to-day trends, at those minute movements in the stock market or the currency value. If you extended that out to looking at the economy once a month, or even better, once a year, then you're much more likely to get more signal than noise. And the longer the time frame, the more signal and the less noise. But this doesn't just apply to finance. You could pick any topic in the news. So as an experiment, I just used the Internet Archive to go back to a year today and see what was on the front page of BBC News. The top two stories was an airstrike in Ukraine that killed 10 people and the government being prepared for the collapse of Thames Water. Now, fast forward a year, is anyone talking about those particular events? One airstrike out of thousands will not tell you the outcome of a war. And it needs a much more longer term understanding of the factors that go into it. And following the latest development of such and such village was occupied or this base was attacked, it tells you very little about how the war is going. And then if you look at politics, think of how much airtime is taking up talking about polls, how people vote in polling data. But there's only one poll that counts, and that's the actual electoral vote. All those other polls are opinion polls. They're just noise. They don't tell you anymore who's won the election. And then think about when there's a political controversy. How much of the news is dedicated to the thing that was actually said or the thing that happened? And then think of how much airtime is generated from reporting other people's opinions of the thing that happened. You'll see there's an announcement, a new policy, a new controversy, and then you'll get about 10 times as many articles relating to people's opinions or paraphrasing or quoting the original issue. And that's just noise. It doesn't tell you any more about the facts at the heart of an issue. This has been my rationale behind cutting back on my news consumption. And I actually did an experiment where I, first of all, went a month without consuming any news. And so I was quite strict on that. So I wouldn't watch any YouTube videos or listen to any podcasts talking about the news. I wouldn't read any news articles. I wouldn't watch TV news, etc. So I did this for a month, first of all. And what I found was that if something was really important or people considered it important, they would tell me. You can head over to spokengreats.com to look at my blog where I wrote about what I learned from quitting the news. But as a flavour of some of the things that people felt compelled to tell me about was an Uber Eats delivery driver biting the thumb off a customer, a terrorist attack in Russia, and I think Princess Catherine being diagnosed with cancer. Now, none of these events has a direct impact on my life, and I certainly didn't feel like I was missing out or that I was glad that I was informed of these events. I also noticed that I checked my phone a lot less, which I think was quite peaceful, to be honest. When you reduce the amount of information that's being input into your brain, it gives more clarity than it deprives you of information. We do not have a lack of information, we have too much. And actually simplifying what you intake helps clarify your thoughts and to think long term. It's not to say that you don't care about anything, but rather there are better ways of investing your mental energy. If you care about geopolitics, for example, thinking about the longer term strategic trends between countries is a far better use of your time than reading every little development about a terrorist attack. If you're interested in economics, going through the long-term trends of the S&P 500 or national debt as a share of GDP, or long-term demographic trends in terms of working age populations, birth rates, etc. Stuff like that is far more useful to you than learning how much is the pound up today, or how many percentage points is the FTSE 100 down. Now, longer term content is not as enticing because, for a start, it takes a longer time to read it. It's not flashy, it's not urgent, it's just there. And faced with watch this 30-second video or read this 300-page book, obviously the video is going to win because it's more engaging, even if the content is more noise than it is signal. And because the payoff is immediate, it's so easy to get drawn into urgent information rather than important information. And it's a great quote by Amos Tversky, who's a co-writer of Thinking Fast and Slow with Daniel Kahneman. It's that we can waste years not knowing how to waste hours. What he means by that is that often some things seem less optimal in the short term. So reading a long book on a short time frame looks like you haven't got much done. If that's all you've done today is you've spent 5 hours reading the same book versus someone else who's consumed maybe 3,000 pieces of content, short form, quick videos, short articles, tweets, etc. On the short-term basis, that person seems more productive. On the longer term, most of that information will have no value to them. And we'll fast forward a year later, how much of that stuff will they actually use is likely to be quite low. Whereas the person who spent that time reading the book is likely to have those skills, which they can then take with them. Cal Newport talks a lot about this in Slow Productivity, his new book. He also has it on his podcast, where as a result of the Industrial Revolution and working on production lines, the way we tend to measure productivity or our work output is rather based on our input. So how many hours on the production line, how many widgets are you producing? Whereas in the age of knowledge work, things are much more opaque in terms of how we actually formulate our problem solving. It's not as simple as input, output. Working 8 hours does not produce a fixed amount of output. If you think of something like a spreadsheet, in the minute to minute, someone manually inputting data would look incredibly busy and they would look like they're doing a lot of work. And they could do that for 8 hours and it looks like they've worked really hard. They've certainly exerted themselves hard. But then someone else who spends the first 2 hours developing macro rules for the spreadsheet is then able to automate everything. And they finish at the third hour. Moment to moment, it looks like they've achieved less until the final moment when the spreadsheet is ready. Similarly, if you were given the task of chopping down a tree, if person A was to immediately start hacking at the tree, it would look like they were getting more done. Whereas person B may spend the first hour sharpening their axe with no tangible output yet to show. And then when person B actually starts the task and starts chopping down the tree, they cut it down much faster. So by slowing down to think things through, prepare more, we can actually get more done. So 3 of the principles in slow productivity are do fewer things, work at a natural pace, and obsess over quality. A lot of the thoughts I've had today about information relate to do fewer things. Often a lot of pressure to get as much done as possible or to do more things. Each thing that you add, each kind of bucket of different interests that you add to your life, you're diverting your energy. So you're diffused, you're not concentrated. And so the amount of attention that you can give to something is not as effective. And actually, by doing fewer things, it enables you, ironically, to do more things. Because by concentrating on certain tasks, it enables you to get through them quicker. The analogy of language learning. So I speak English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Russian, smattering of Italian when I have to as well. I didn't learn all of these at once. When I tell people I speak all these languages, it seems like I'm performing some kind of juggling trick. And that seems much more impressive. The reality is that I learned them one at a time. I learned French, then Spanish, then Russian, then Portuguese, then Italian. By concentrating on one language at a time, I was able to make far more progress than if I just started 5 languages and was dedicating an equal amount of time to each one. 10 times 1 hour is not the same as 1 times 10 hours. There's an asymmetry there, and not all time is equal. More concentrate, intense work will produce more effective results than dissipated, distracted work. That's also the theme of another Cal Newport's books, Deep Work, where he talks about producing good work through concentrated, blocked out time working periods. So that's do fewer things. Working at a natural pace, we've touched on a bit here as I was talking about slowing down. You want to be able to work at a pace that is sustainable to you. And if you do fewer things, it enables you to block out some time for when you want to do some intense work. So you could block out a few days where you spend hours and hours on the same skill set or project, and that will often make much more progress than spending 1 hour a week over the course of a year. And then after those few days are over, you can rest again and go back to a comfortable pace. Something like this is much more sustainable than imagine trying to work a few hours each week on different projects and you're making little progress on each of them, but you're also working at quite a high tempo. And because you've not completed anything, you can't really take a rest. And having that capacity to rest is more important than how much you work per se. We have an incredible capacity for work. We can work for incredibly long periods and in high intensity as long as we have the appropriate rest in place. I gave the example in the previous podcast about eating lunch at your desk at work is a surefire way of getting no work done, but also having no rest. And actually accepting that you can take some time away and actually switch off fully, go from fully off to fully on. It removes so much of that wasted energy in that middle zone where you're not really working that much, but you feel exhausted. So doing fewer things and working at a natural pace kind of feed into each other quite naturally. And as a sort of consequence of the first two, you have the luxury now of obsessing over quality. As we were talking earlier about the difference between signal and noise, if you want to be in a position where you are producing more signal than you are noise, then you need to focus on quality. Quality will determine how useful something is and the shelf life of it. And so the more time you're able to dedicate to a project, to focus on it and to improve the quality, the more likely it is to be of use. I will add a caveat to that though, because there is a necessary amount of quantity that you will probably have to pass through in order to get to a quality level. This is now my 16th, 17th podcast episode. I would like to think that it's been getting a little bit better in terms of the editing process and just how smoothly you're going from topic to topic, etc. But there are people who have done thousands of episodes, and of course their quality of their production is going to be so much more effective because they've done it so many times. And producing a quantity of work allows you to go through that process of recognizing what is quality because it increases your sample size. Often a comparison made in research studies assigning a photography assignment to students, and one group of students were just told they can take one photo and the other group were told to take 100 photos. And the group that took 100 photos produced better photos because each time they took a photo, they learned from the process. So there is a quantity aspect to the obsessing over quality. There is an element there of getting the reps in, as it were, to get to the point where you can use good form. So that's really where I'm at in terms of my relationship with information now. I'm trying to limit what I take in to longer term things which will aid my understanding and have a longer term application. So principles over facts, because facts are context dependent, they're dated, can lose their relevance. Whereas principles are eternal. If you learn the principles, you learn them once. You have to relearn the facts every time. So I'm focusing on principles, longer term themes, and looking at things in a seasonal context. So taking a couple of projects and focusing on those as much as possible. And then once I've made sufficient progress in them, then move on to something else and focus my attention on that. And just remembering that there's an asymmetry there, because 100 cars traveling at 1 miles per hour is not the same as one car traveling at 100 miles per hour. Most information we receive is noise, not signal. So the way to change that is to increase the time frame of the information that we receive. I think we'll leave that there for today. Thank you for listening to the Spoken Greats podcast. If you enjoyed that episode, please like and hit the subscribe button. Be sure to check out my blog at spokengreats.com and look forward to more great ideas from great books. See you soon.